Hey, welcome to the Kingdoms Podcast. My name is Luke and I host this with my buddy Matt Ma. And our goal is to empower you to discover how your faith impacts culture for God's kingdom. To do that, we're sitting down with different men and women from all kinds of disciplines to uncover how they, through their ambitions and vocational skill set, make a difference in the lives of those around them. And so if this is helpful to you, we'd love it if you could like it, share it, and subscribe. In the meantime, enjoy today's episode. Well, friends, thanks for jumping in to join us for this episode. I'm super grateful that you're with us and super grateful that Kristian Jack has joined us today. Kristian, thanks for making time to be on the podcast.
Luke, it's an honor and a pleasure. Thanks for inviting me on. I'm looking forward to having a chat with you.
Well, me too, man. I've never had the chance to sit down with somebody who has your career and who, I'm a little bit envious about this, but who spent a whole tournament present in person to watch a World Cup competition, as you have not only done back in 2022, but multiple times over. But really quickly for listeners, if you've never met Kristian or don't know about his work, he's the Vice President of Content and Media with the Canadian Premier League, the CPL, which is a pro league here in Canada. And Kristian has a wealth of experience in the area of sports journalism and beyond. And so today, I'm grateful for the chance just to not only capture a little bit from his vocational experience, but also his personal story. So Kristian, I wonder if you, especially for people who don't know your whole story, if you could maybe take us back to the beginning, growing up as a young person, a teen, and what was it like to first discover a passion for sports journalism, a hunger to make a difference in that space? And what did it actually look like to not just have that dream, but to turn that dream into a reality?
Yeah, thanks, Luke. I mean, looking back at it, even if I maybe didn't know then as a bit of a naive youngster, God had such an amazing amount of power over my decision making at such an early age. I was blessed to be born into a sports mad family. My brother was younger than me, and he's sports mad, and he's made a career out of that too. My dad was a sports nut, and we would be that family with weekends that would pack our lunches and go out and go to sporting events, cricket, soccer, rugby, in racing, lots of different things in England. And very quickly I found that that was my love. And you'd always be waiting for the next moment to go and enjoy the next piece of live sport, and just like any boy, you play lots of different sports and you love it. And then I guess my knowledge for sports pretty quickly understood that my talent wasn't quite at the level that it would make it to become a professional athlete.
I understand that.
Yes, I know you've got some great. I think you're a far better athlete than me, so we'll leave it at that. But what I meant by that was I learned pretty quickly that, okay, how am I going to make a living into sports and love what I'm doing while not playing? And so I think it was around about grade 6 when I knew that, like, I loved almost as much as sport, I loved the passion of storytelling. And I loved English class. I loved writing. I loved being able to take viewers to a different place through the written word at the time, which was far more popular than audio and video formats that are obviously far more popular now. And so I used to really enjoy projects in English around the Olympic Games or around big moments that we could talk about sports. And so I think very early I realized that that's what I wanted to do. So I kind of followed that pathway at an early age, even before high school. I wanted to, follow media and learn more about it with different formats of videography and video editing and photography and writing. So that's kind of the pathway that I took with my secondary education, first of all in media studies, and then a little bit more specific in journalism in university as a journalism graduate, while just, watching lots of sports and just enjoying everything I could. So the great thing about it was trying to combine it. And in university and college, I did a lot of projects around that. Journalism school, I graduated and was blessed to get a job at my local newspaper at the age of 19 at the time. But at the time, working in sports journalism was seen as something you had to earn. You don't get right away. So I was thrust into this environment in a very cutthroat, aggressive environment of chasing news stories, which I'll admit I was not very good at. I was not very good at, because I'm a firm believer that to be really good at something, you need to have passion. And I didn't have passion. I didn't have passion to tell those news stories because, you know, you write what you love and you write what you know. And when you don't love something, you can tell. I can tell in a piece of media, well, something, an asset that someone's created, if it's been done with love and passion. And I'll be honest, that for 18 months, it was very difficult as a youngster navigating the media waters about, you know, a lot of just, you know, devastation in the world, and my heart found it very difficult, Luke, to handle it. I was very weighted down by it as a young journalist, and I was questioning whether I should be in the industry. And eventually, I applied for a different job, and got it, and it led to becoming a sports editor at another newspaper. And I got away from the news and the difficult challenges of reading really difficult, hard news, and dealing with people's grief on a daily basis. A lot of the times, to be honest, it was really hard for me at the time as a 20, 21-year-old. And then I fell into this pathway of sports. That this all happened in England, and then I moved to Canada when I was 21 and carried on in that pathway a little bit as well. So that's just a little bit of a small idea into how it all began, mate.
Yeah, can I just really double click on that real quick, what you just said a second ago? Because it's I admire the stick with itness, if you will, to say, I know I want to do this. This is an open door. It's not my greatest passion, but I'm going to keep tracking with it. But then to make the move at 21, to not just like, you didn't just go from like England to Ireland. You're like, we're leaving Europe for North America. And that, I think a lot of listeners have considered the fact that pursuing their passion will take a big change and a courageous leap. What was the driving factor that gave you the courage to say, all right, I'm going to Canada. I'm, you know, packing up, moving on, establishing myself in a totally new place, because this is what I really feel passionate about and called to do. What was the inspiration or motivation or courage that gave you the bravery to do that?
We were very blessed as a family. I wouldn't say that we were incredibly well off. I would say that we were blessed as like a middle class family in the UK. And what I mean by that was, as a teenager, probably, from a very early age to around about 16, we made a couple of trips to North America as a family for vacation. So it wasn't something you could afford to do every year. But those trips to the US, Florida, California, I then had some work experience in Atlanta, Georgia for CNN in the 90s on my own, were absolutely inspirational. And there was something that was very, very powerful about North America that was pulling me. And subsequently, my parents, who made that decision, and my younger brother as well. So they went earlier than I did, because I was at that point 20. I was 21, so I was classed, when we put together the immigration papers. I was classed as an adult, so my papers took longer to be accepted. But again, this is all the Lord, because in 1997, we as a family came to Canada to do a 17-day trip around Quebec and Ontario as a family vacationing. And through another family that we knew in the hometown where we lived in England, they knew a family that lived in Burlington, Ontario. And they said, oh, you're friends of them, you come and stay with us. So instead of staying downtown Toronto in hotels and really being that vacation visitor, we got a taste for 10 or so days to live with them and to see what it was truly like to live. And so that was a different path. That was a different look, and saying, oh no, this is, and that really, at that point, when we were already thinking about coming to North America, that was the instigator. You know, the small candle went quickly to the firework. You know, it was like, boom, let's go. You know, let's do this. And that planted the seed quickly when we went back to put the immigration papers together, and Canada became the destination. I love the United States. I was very blessed to spend a lot of time there. My wife is from there, and I absolutely adore the place. But I just, at the time, it was just too much of a cultural change to move from England to the US.
Right.
For lots of different reasons. But Canada felt like a supremely beautiful middle ground, where it was a lot more multicultural, a lot more accepting of people coming from different countries at the time. Didn't feel too far away from the UK. But yes, it still had that North American flavor that attracted to us. So they went, and we made a big leap of faith as a family, and we really felt that this was the right thing to do. And I followed, and it wasn't easy. You know, we came over here in 2000, and I didn't really get a media job that I could rely on as even a part-timer until the beginning of 2003. So it brought me to other areas of my life where I figured out what I wanted to do, and I did some part-time writing here or there and couldn't really get discovered, and then worked with people who had acquired brain injuries because I just had this need to want to help with people. So I would work with occupational therapists and physiotherapists, and they would put in programs for me to work, closely with young and old. My eldest was 89 and my youngest was 6. Clients who had acquired brain injuries. And everybody was at a very different level that needed that rehabilitation coach to help them with things like the gym or homework or movies, or just be like that guiding mentor for them. So I did that for 2 or 3 years until full-time media took over the responsibilities. So it was a different path. And during that couple of years, I met my wife, and so it was, even though professionally, I suppose what I'm trying to say, even though professionally my goals didn't necessarily come to fruition very quickly, Luke, other areas of my life did. And it was clearly I was where I needed to be.
Yeah. So I wonder if you could speak to that, Kristian, because I know that it's so interesting to hear about how people's faith influences their work. And at the same time, the experience of work, and maybe for you, working with people recovering from brain injury, or even that creative side of working to develop yourself in the hopes of stepping more fully into the media, that those pursuits and being in motion, if you will, to serve people, to chase a dream, that those experiences also can have a really formative effect and shape the way we understand our faith in good ways too. So in this whole process, moving to North America, meeting and marrying your wife who's from the States, pursuing this dream, working in something outside of media for a time to make that a reality, what role did your faith play in all of that? What was being formed in you in that process?
Well, I think to answer that question, I think I have to start at the beginning. So I went to a Church of England school, and that was obviously, we would pray at school and we would sing hymns, but it wasn't necessarily something that would be thrust upon us daily. It wasn't a Christian, strictly a Christian school. So faith as a youngster was really what I would just carry around as a little bit of almost like a small bag. You didn't really take over the life. It was there. You kind of carried it. I was a believer, but I didn't really know what it meant. Do you know what I mean? I didn't necessarily grow up in a home that way. And so my faith mentors came externally away from the home. And it really ignited with the move over here, and Jenny, my wife, has been an enormous igniter for that. So when I met her, I had a lot of questions that she was able to answer, and we were able to go and find a church that was able to answer those questions too, that I didn't necessarily had found, even though I knew that, Jesus Christ was the Savior, and I knew I believed, and I knew why I believed. I still wanted to know a lot more questions, and I found myself putting myself in those areas to get them. I mean, I'm naturally quite I'm naturally quite interested in. I'm more of a learner in life. Like you'll know, like this is a difficult, a bit of a challenge for me to talk about myself. We were talking before we recorded. I'm usually your end, and I'm usually fascinated by other people's story, and that's what I do for a living, is interview people and ask questions about them. So I think that helped me a little bit become a little bit wiser and learn, because I like to listen and sit back and take that in. So I hope that answers your question, because I think that was a big moment, I think, for me, that I was able to come here, and obviously Jenny played an enormous role in that, in terms of discovering more. And as I said, being open to that, to learn more, find a church that we felt comfortable in, and then really just discover it from this side of the world. As I said, when we moved here, we gave up everything, and you lose everything from all the pillars and the structures that you build in life, right? So I guess it was a real crucial time for me to just open my arms and just take anything in that I could, and sacrifice that, and just be where I am, and just be present where I knew I was supposed to be, even though I didn't know what it was supposed to become.
Yes. That's a statement, to be present where you knew you were supposed to be, even though you didn't know exactly what you were to become. I think so often we do tie faith to sometimes subcultures or different routines, and there can be great merit to those disciplines. But I would really agree with you in that posture of saying it's like leaping forward and opening up your life, and realizing that sometimes in those spaces where some of the things we're most familiar with, or maybe most depend on, when those things are taken away or we lay them down, that God loves to meet us in good and life transforming ways. So thank you for sharing that. And what it brings to mind, Kristian, is that you make this big change right around 2000 with your family. You come to Canada, you get married, you're pursuing a career in media. You're able to step into that in 2003. And I know for me, and potentially some of the other listeners, I first learned about you seeing you reporting on soccer with TSN here in Canada, doing a great job in promoting the sport here in Canada and in North America. And you talk about an experience where something you maybe were depending on changes unexpectedly, is taken away. And I know that a few years ago now, just after 8 years with TSN, you were let go in the midst of the pandemic, which unfortunately wasn't uncommon for different sports broadcasters and journalists. It's difficult when there's no sports happening, obviously, but that's hard, and I can only imagine how challenging that would be. And so I'd love for you to speak to that experience in light of the fact that there's listeners who are saying, I can relate. I can relate to an unexpected change, maybe a loss of a job or something like that. I can relate to depending on something and then it changing in a way that I hadn't foreseen.
Mm.
And I can relate to saying, God, like, what are you doing in this? And how are you going to work this out? How are you going to resolve this? And so, to the extent that you're comfortable, Kristian, could you speak to that experience, which, while not everyone's been a sports broadcaster, many people can relate to in their own way?
Yeah, 100%. In fact, I actually went through it twice, but the TSN one is more relevant because it's obviously more recent. But I was 10 years at the Score television network, and when Rogers bought the Score, there was this promises of takeover and being better, and then I was one of the ones initially laid off immediately there
Wow.
after 10 years. And then at that point, my kids were really young, and you get really concerned at that moment for your livelihood.
Mm,
And very quickly, I think, again, I look back at this as God was immediately understanding that there's times for patience and perseverance, and there's times to understand that I'm going to turn the switch pretty quickly and I'm going to show you something. And what I
mm,
mean by that is that when I left the Score, I was very concerned immediately about our livelihood as a family. And I remember running on the treadmill one time and then just talking to him about it. And I remember thinking, if this is not supposed to be for me, just show me where I'm supposed to be next.
yeah.
And within days, I had a screen test at TSN. And
Wow.
within weeks, I was on TSN's broadcast,
Wow.
and at that time I had these things like this where people were like, oh, you're not really supposed to go there yet because, you're still trying to work out. And I was just like, just go and be where you need to be and do the TSN and see if it works out. And I was just doing part-time work. And as you said, it turned into 8.5 years. And so
Mm,
I don't think at that time, the time was ready for patience and perseverance. It was survival mode at that point. And I was
okay.
very blessed to be able to go into that area, because it was, even though it was a big life changer, there was always a thought that it could happen. The
Mm,
TSN one was far more out of the blue. So I'd
mm,
worked there for 8.5 years. We're a very small department. We've been through many, many different tournaments, many different, different things. And as you said, it came with a little bit more, I suppose the word is notoriety, but a lot more people knew who I was because we were on TV for 150 to 200 live shows per year, doing
right.
all the different broadcasts and major tournaments like Toronto FC making the MLS Cup, and it's watched by
Hmm.
millions, and then World Cups and things. So it certainly came a bit more out of the blue, and I had to handle something I didn't have to handle 9 years earlier, where there was a lot of outside influencers talking about the decision for me to leave.
Right.
And at that point, it's how does that change the way that you handle something? You've
Mm,
got everybody messaging you and everybody calling you and everybody's shocked and stunned. And I bring that up because I really remember it. So it happened. It was 2 years ago next week.
mhm,
So it was
mhm.
February the 4th. I got a phone call, and then I took the phone call, and then I came off and I immediately found Jenny, and we just prayed right away.
Mhm,
And
mm.
this is really not a story I've shared with anybody else, but I feel compelled to share with you because I felt that immediately you just start to worry about, like, am I going to lose my house?
Mm,
Like
yeah.
that's the thing that, the house that the home that you built, for you and your kids. And
Mm,
that's instantly your survival mode. And then we just prayed.
mm,
And then I remember having, I think that happened around 11 in the morning. And like by 3 o'clock, I had a big smile on my face and I just had peace. I just had incredible peace. A good friend of mine who was a pastor at a local church here, we talked about Romans 5 with peace and hope and
mm,
perseverance and being
mm.
where you need to be. And at that time, that was very different to the 2013. I just was like, okay, I've been taken away from something that I always felt I had a good life balance, but it was very demanding for work. People talk about the pandemic. I never had time off during the pandemic. I had a camera here live in my office where anytime they
Right,
wanted, call me up and we'd be live on Sports Center talking about something.
right.
So like it was a very busy, demanding job.
Mm,
It was a very lonely and isolated job sometimes because of
mm,
you weren't really part of a group. You would do broadcasts, but then you would go in, you would prepare for them, and you would do a lot of work and preparation for hours upon end here in my
yeah.
office. And so I was like, okay, this is not supposed to be where I'm supposed to be now. I didn't know anywhere where I was supposed to be next. But I think that was for me, was to just put faith in him and just believe that what will be next. And I didn't know how
Mm,
long that would be.
mm,
And, again, I'll share with you, we had a lot of challenges at that time. My wife had a lot of health challenges. You worry about what's going to happen to your home, or what's going to happen going forward, whether it's the end for your career. Do you have to find a different career?
mm.
But I had remarkable peace, mate,
Yeah.
like remarkable peace that this was supposed to be what it was be. And I bring up the outside influences because a lot of other people didn't have that. And I understood why, because they
Mm,
were emotional about it. They were mad. They were angry at Bell. They were mad that they weren't going to see me, or they weren't going to talk. They were frustrated for me.
mm,
And so I had to take those on and not change their emotions, but make sure that they didn't change me.
mm,
Right. At that point, I had to ensure that after I prayed with Jenny and we got to that point, that nobody, no matter how angry they were or frustrated or mad or loving and caring, and it all came from a good place, that I didn't take that and carry that forward, because it was important for me to be what we needed it to be at that time, was just be still.
yeah. Wow. How did you do that? Because I mean, I've never been in that situation and can only imagine having that kind of public profile where whether it's Twitter or other platforms, people are messaging you and yeah, the whole range of sure of emotions surrounding this. How did you graciously interact with people who were for you but quite emotional about this change while still maintaining a clear head and a level focus?
Yeah, it was sometimes it was overwhelming,
Mm,
is the word. It was never intimidating. It was just overwhelming, I think. And everybody, it was wonderful to see so many people and be kind and humble, right?
mm,
Like, I've got notes written down on my desk that I never forget. God loves a cheerful giver, right? And
mm,
and they were surrounded by cheerful givers,
mm.
and people were kind enough that they all came from good intentions, and you're right, the social media it just blew up, right? And that's not coming from a place of ego. I'm just explaining it. It was really, it was an incredibly humbling time.
Mm,
Um, uh, and then, the challenge was the what's next, because you
mm,
don't know what's being presented to you. Is it being presented to you because God wants me to open that door? Or is it being presented to me because people just want a piece of me and they say, what we want you to help you with what's next?
yeah. Mm,
And so I was answering, opening doors, answering Zoom calls, answering phone calls, taking a lot of it in. And at one point I just became overwhelmed by it all. And I
mm,
just said, I have to stop.
mm,
And when I would pray, and I would just say, at this point, I can't do 50 more interviews or 50 more Zooms or 50 more meetings to find out what I need to do next. I'm not sure. Just, at that point, I felt I'll know when the right doors are to open, because I didn't feel like I was giving my best to these people either at that point, because I
mm.
still needed time. Grieve is the wrong word, but I still needed time to just, mend the scars a
Yes.
little bit, and then understand that I'm in a place to listen, properly. And then when I'm doing these calls, I understood that sometimes I was glazing over them and I wasn't giving them the best of me.
That's
So
fair.
at that point, I needed to just step back and again, just have some peace and just figure out the time. And that's, a couple of my good friends have lost their jobs over the last couple of years. That's the advice that I've given to them is to, in the midst of things with finances and things that are very important in life, if you can take the time, just take the little bit of time to understand that, you've got to get back to to how close you can be for the best version of yourself to understand what's next, and don't make that decision quickly because you're not quite at that place yet to make that decision rationally.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of wisdom in that. A lot of wisdom in that, and honest humanity in that, right?
Right.
The reality of, I guess you could say, processing a
Yeah.
significant change and adversity in that. Well, thank you for that, Kristian, because for listeners, again, many of whom won't be in your specific vocation, many people can relate to those kind of moments of, wow, I didn't see this coming, and what do I do next? And how do I navigate my own emotions or the emotions of people close to me, or sometimes in a broader circle than that, and how they're responding to this. It would seem more and more, the more I learn about journalism, that resilience is a key characteristic that you need if you're going to be in the game for the long run. Well, I realize that's highlighting a demanding and difficult situation for you. But being a huge soccer fan myself, I couldn't resist the opportunity to sit down for an interview with you without talking a bit about your experience covering the World Cup, both the most recent World Cup, but also, well, correct me if I'm wrong, Kristian, you've covered, is it 5 so far? Every World Cup since
Yes.
2006?
Yes.
Man,
Yeah.
that's,
I didn't go to all of them, but I've covered them all. Yeah.
oh,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
awesome. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
So I wonder, just thinking back to December of, well, I guess late November and December of 2022, you're in Qatar for the World Cup, and what words or phrases come to mind when you think of describing that World Cup and that experience for you personally?
Mm. It was a journey into the unknown, which was
Mm,
really unusual for me because I'm a notorious planner. I'm a notorious in my note taking and I'm not good at a lot of things in life when it comes to being handy around the house or things. I do my best. And I understand, trust me, I've got a lot of weaknesses. But one thing that I feel like that I was blessed with was the ability to think ahead and plan
mm,
for
mm.
certain scenarios. But this was unlike anything else because I'd never been anywhere near there in the world before. It was a World Cup like nothing else in terms of, for those who don't know anything about World Cups, World Cup is the pinnacle of soccer.
Mm,
It is the major tournament for countries in the world. And usually it's held in countries with vast distances between certain locations. So, but this one just happened to be held in Doha, in Qatar, where all the stadiums, all 8, were within an hour's drive of each other. So if you're from Toronto or whatever city you're listening to this in, think about wherever a major city you've been to and think about hosting that World Cup. That was like this World Cup. So what that meant was that we had the ability to cover a lot more stories quickly
mm.
and attend for, a lot more games. While still navigating the fact that we're coming to a different place in the world and I'd never been to the Middle East before, and different things and different influences over there and how they conduct their lifestyle sometimes. And so there was lots of challenges with that. And again, I feel compelled to share with you that when I went on the plane, when I eventually decided that I was going to go, I was exhausted because I'd come off a long season of covering the Canadian Premier League.
Yes.
And within about a week before going, I didn't think I was going to go because I didn't know mentally if I was able to go and do the best
Wow.
job that I could do, because I'd just
Wow.
come back from a very exhausting season and we didn't know what the challenges were going to be. And I needed to take a few days to go. The thing is, with working in the creative space, as a media member, if you're fatigued, you will never produce good work.
Right.
You're playing at it, is how I
Mm,
describe it. You're
mm.
not thinking in your thoughts. So I had to try and generate another level of energy. And so I did that by obviously again praying and hoping that he could guide me where he needed to do, and he did. And I said I didn't think I was going to go, and then eventually I was told I'm going, and I'm like, okay, I'll go. This is where I'm supposed to be. And so yeah, it was a journey into the unknown, to answer your question, and it was very unique. It was a very unique tournament to cover. one that was a true blessing, very humble to be there, and to tell the story of not just Canada but all these countries playing there. Two Canadians. I've covered this tournament now in Canada and understand that as much as this was different because Canada were there and that was great, and we may get into that, but this country is full of people from all over the world, and they're interested in hearing about Brazil, which I know you would be anyway, but different countries around the world for different reasons because that's where they're from, and so it was special to go see so many different cultures and so many different teams and play different ways, and tell those stories out there while probably getting about 3 hours sleep.
Oh, wow.
per night. We would it would be, because the games were earlier in the tournament, the games locally were 1, 4, 7, and 10. And so we would be trying to go to 2 games a day, which would theoretically mainly end with the 10 o'clock game, local time, which was 2 o'clock Eastern in Canada. And by the time that game ended, then we would do our live shows, our live tapings, our editing, whatever we had to write about that day. We would get the bus back to the media center, and we would probably walk into our home around about 3:30 in the morning after the Uber drive back. And at that point, you decompress, take a shower, maybe eat something, and then the sun would come up, actually, Luke, at 4:25 a.m.
Oh, no.
So I remember that. And then I was like, to try and get to sleep before that. And then we would start again the next day and be out of the house by 9. So it was fantastic. It was a thrill. I was only there for the first 3 weeks. I didn't stay there for the entire tournament, but I stayed there for 3 weeks. I saw the last 16 knockout stages. I did all of Canada, and as I said, it was a journey into the unknown, a unique one, and very special to be there, no doubt about it.
Yeah. Wow. And a multicultural, diverse experience, even in itself, as fans, I'm sure, from all over the world coming together to support their team and, well, just taking the spectacle that is the World Cup.
Yes.
I think, well, on that, you mentioned Canada a moment ago. And, I know for me, I'm sure for you and many others, there's this, we're already counting down to 2026 when Canada, the US, and Mexico are scheduled to host the World Cup. And I'm just intrigued to know, from your perspective, having followed the Canadian national team, especially their recent journey to qualify for and compete in the last World Cup, what would you say needs to evolve in that team for them to, obviously they're going to be present and competing as hosts, but to advance to the knockout stages in 2026?
Yeah, I think a lot, actually. I think it was great that they were in the World Cup in 2022. Again, for those who aren't soccer fans, like, if you host a World Cup like Canada are going to host in 2026, you are already guaranteed your spot.
Right.
So they didn't guarantee their spot in 2022, and they qualified so well that they became one of the talking points of the whole World Cup. And here's Canada playing in their first men's World Cup since 1986. This is usually a country that is famous for how well the women do at World Cups, who play this year, obviously, in Australia and New Zealand in the summer. But for the men, playing in a World Cup it just didn't happen. It happened once in 86. So the fact that they had that experience and they got there, I think, is important, because they will be viewed through a different lens in 2026. It will no longer just be, they're only here because they're hosting. It's actually, it's a team that is worthy of playing on this stage, where they showed that in 2022. So I think with that, the expectations should therefore rise. And people have to think, okay, well, you're going to be hosting games. You're going to be playing at home in the group stages. You absolutely have to get through the group. It's going to be a 48-team World Cup, so you would hope they could get through to the last 32 and then move forward. But there's a lot that comes with that. They've got to find more players who I think have a deeper roster that they can rely on. I think in Qatar, it was shown that their starters and their best players were very reliable, but I think the talent, once they started to get key injuries and needed depth, I think was shown up a little bit. So they've got to develop better players, and we're all trying to figure out how they do that. And I think the other thing is as you welcome part of the world to the World Cup, the culture of this country needs to come with facilities. We need to have better facilities for Canadians to develop here, and also to welcome some of these teams to train and make Canada home for as long as it takes when they play here. I would hate for it to be, hate's probably the strong word, but I would not like it to be a point where these countries are drawn in games to play in Toronto or Vancouver, but they're training in the United States, and they just fly in the night before to Canada. They play the game and they fly out. We want to welcome the world, and that's, I think, part of the World Cup, is that these countries come in and they stay within the cultures of Canada, and they get to know it while they're here, and that's a true host for me of a tournament.
Right. Well said. I agree with you on that, and can't wait for the tournament to be here.
Special.
Yes, and more than many people realize, but it really is special, and probably the most watched single sport tournament in the world.
Right.
So all eyes will be on North America, more than a lot of North Americans realize at this point in time.
Totally.
But Kristian, I wanted to, I've so appreciated you sharing about your experience in Qatar, your perspectives looking ahead to 2026, and wanted to touch on the unique reality of sports journalism, and that a lot of people see someone like you and they're reading your articles, or they're seeing you broadcasting in front of a camera, and we see the finished product, but we don't see the process, and we also don't see some of the challenges and the losses that can take place for journalists behind the scenes, behind the screen, if you will. And I know that this past December at the World Cup in Qatar, the reality of walking through a tragedy in the journalism community was something that was very real for you, very real for the other people, peers alongside you covering the sport. Some people know that American journalist Grant Wall, sadly, tragically, passed away quite unexpectedly while covering the World Cup. He was in Qatar. He was with you. I know you had multiple interactions with him. And so in those moments where there's this demand to continue with the tournament, right? Like games are still happening, like records are still being set, like soccer dreams of various athletes are still being chased after and realized, or postponed to a future tournament. That's going on, and yet at the same time, on a very personal level, the journalism community is grieving the loss of one of the best. And so what was it like for you to navigate that experience in the midst of being at the World Cup? And on a personal level, what would you say, how did your faith factor into that process of supporting other journalists who are grieving, and your own perspective in a time of loss?
Yeah, they're all great points, Luke. I just got home when Grant passed, so I was with him 4 days before. So wow. I found myself in the media center, and we always would joke at World Cups that you go through, honestly, probably about 300 different security checkpoints during the time you're there. Like wherever you want to go, any stadium, you have a badge and they basically scan it. And every time you go through a media center, you put your bag through. And there was these funny stories where they would have the World Cup designated water. And if you weren't carrying the designated water, you would have to take off the wrapper. So you could have an empty water bottle, but you couldn't have a non-FIFA designated water sponsor. All of those things that come up. And so you go through all these things and you have to put all three. And so Grant was actually in front of me going into the media center at one time. And I found myself, walking and catching him up and shouting. We walked for a good 10-15 minutes to where we were both going, discussing our time there. And Grant wasn't feeling very well. And I wasn't feeling great at the time. The air quality was not great in Qatar. The heat was exactly what everyone would expect. It was very, very hot.
Yes.
But there was a lot of air conditioning in a lot of places. So you would go from an extreme to another extreme very quickly, traveling on the bus, traveling on transit. A lot of the stadiums were very cold. A lot of indoors were cold. Then you'd go outside and it was very hot. And so there was a lot of coughing everywhere in all the media. We would, you mentioned it, because it was such a small area of travel. We would see so many of us all the time. We necessarily wouldn't know, but we'd all go to every game, but we would on a media bus, and you'd, all over the world. And that was pretty special. And so Grant was like struggling, and he said, "I'm just not feeling well. I'm just on my way to the medical center. I'm going to go check it out. It might be a case of bronchitis or something." And I just said to him, "I've not felt great myself." And we kind of we shared some stories. None of us complaining or anything. And we talked for quite a while, and then we met another colleague who were talking about different things. And then I saw a tweet, I think it was the Friday night, I saw a tweet from US Soccer to say that, they were tragically announcing the passing of Grant Wall. I dropped my phone, it fell out my hand. Um,
Yeah.
and instantly I thought right away, please tell me that people are aware that he wasn't well. Because then another time, there were suddenly, social media is like you suddenly see people um, leading allegations to how it happened, or there was other
Yes. Yeah.
areas of why. And I'm like, do I need to tell people that like he told me this personal information of him not feeling very well? Do I need to get that out? So I instantly messaged a couple of people, and then I started realizing, because I traveled, so I hadn't seen his work over the last 2 days, that he actually explained that and he shared that himself on his own personal podcast and his own personal media, that he hadn't felt well. So relief is the wrong word, but at the time I felt a little bit of satisfaction that at least people understood what his challenges were, because in those moments, you're grieving and you're just distraught, but you're like, please, I want people to know like how he felt. Like I didn't want
Yeah.
people to think that this was just and then I thought about people, because apparently it happened in Lusail Stadium, which is where they had the final.
Mm.
And I believe it was during the Netherlands game against Argentina, this crazy extra time game where, it happened during that time. And then the media tribune where we would sit. So we as media were very blessed. Most of the time you would apply for a ticket for a game and you would find out whether you received it 48 hours before. And then you would go to the media center, you would scan your pass, and then it would give you your ticket. And it would tell you whether you either have a media tribune desk or a media tribune seat,
Mm.
or you didn't get one at all. And so most of the time you would be given a desk and you'd sit there, and you're in the stands, but you've got a desk, and then this, you're surrounded by media. And it did strike me when I was there, and I went to 27 games, and I think 23 of them I had a desk, and 4 you had like a seat next to it, which was because it was a little smaller, or you weren't considered priority. And it struck me at the time where it was like, we're pretty isolated up here. Like you only
Mm.
you had a media entrance, which was great, but you didn't really see a lot of people, fans. They would come from a different area, so you'd have your own designated media entrance. It was very well organized. But it struck me one time when I was there that Lusail Stadium is very high, and I was like, well, I remember thinking at the time one time, like, what would happen here? And I thought about that when it happened, and my mind went to the people who were around him when it happened too. Like I wondered how it would, I instantly wondered, how was he okay? Did he get what he needed?
Mm.
Because
Yeah.
I that's what I wanted to know. And so, I did a little bit of talking to a few people who were kind of heavily involved, a little bit, not too much, it's an awkward thing to broach with them. And then read a little bit more about it later to understand how it went, because obviously through the thoughts of the tragedy, your mind goes all over the place, but you
Mm.
just really hope that he was given every chance of care,
Yeah.
at that moment, from the
Mm.
moment that it turned. Because there was some rumblings in social media, we can get into that if you want, but it's often full of opinions and not facts, which is why I don't really enjoy it a lot of the time. There was
Mm.
some opinions that he'd been thrown into an Uber with a couple of people, they hadn't really got enough care and things like that, and the awful things that get portrayed into people's minds. And so I just hoped and prayed that he had at least the care that he needed at that time,
Mm.
which is the very least anybody deserves.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I mean, yeah, any way you look at it, difficult and heartbreaking. And I wonder, I mean, just for you, Christian, and for, so often when you're in those spaces, people aren't thinking about life or death. They're thinking about, the sports or the tournament at hand. But in those moments, were there any ways in which that experience shaped your perspective, or even the way you think of yourself as a journalist in the company of other journalists, and
Mm.
how you show up or how you impact people's lives? Was there any moments of new insight? Because tragedy is heartbreaking, but often it's a severe teacher, if that makes sense.
Totally, yeah. No,
Yeah.
I agree. I think for me, it's about relationships that you build with people.
Yeah.
And, we shared quite a few relationships, not just Grant and I, but the media when we were out there.
Mm.
I'm always conscious of sharing them, because I think that there's particularly some people like to hear about it when you write about things, but some people are very adamant that all they want to hear about is what you have to say about what happens on the pitch. You're there to
Right.
cover a tournament,
Mm.
and so like some personal stories I think really relate to some people, and some personal stories people have no interest in. But we
Mm.
shared a lot of personal stories, a lot of things that, we would have bus drivers getting lost and then just getting frustrated and parking on the highway and saying, everyone's got to get out. You got to walk to the stadium,
Oh,
and we
wow.
would be like 2 miles away from the stadium, and it's kicking off. The game's kicking off in an hour, and half the people would get off the bus and start walking, and then a few of us would walk up to the bus driver, and we're broken English and Italians and French, and we're all trying to talk him around and like trying to compose him and say, no, just go down here and help us through this. And then eventually he would find his way, and there would be this big roar, and we'd pass everybody who was still walking, and then
Oh, no.
golf carts would show up and would take us to the press box, and we'd all share these stories, and that's part of the journey, and
Yeah.
I would travel. I was only myself and my videographer Nora, and she and I just traveled we spent so many hours together. You just have so much fun, and then everybody's there for different purposes. Everyone's there for different media empires or different written work or thing, but everyone's there to cover the sport, and everyone's blessed to do it. And so I think the relationships that you find are special, and
Yeah.
I was able to make friends and talk to people during that time. And some people are there to cover different things, like I would spend times with writers who from the news angle, who were there to cover the fan engagement, or how Asia was handling it, or the protesters, or the big things with Iran, and things that they could teach me about that I wouldn't have any idea about, that I was there
Right.
for. I could teach them. I could break down the United States midfield three, but I couldn't tell you about the story that's going on with the politics in other areas. So I think they're just really good learning tools, and just to understand and learn humbly, and find out why everyone's there, and everyone's got different passions to be there, and understand, and hopefully people can understand why we're there. Because I think ultimately, I certainly try to convey to the Canadians that were watching my show and reading my stuff, just what it was like out there for the most part.
Yeah, well said. That each experience and each life is a gift. And I think too, Christian, it's funny to think soccer stadiums are huge. So it's funny to think of a bus driver being able to see a stadium, yeah,
Oh
2-3 miles away, and then saying, "I'm not to get there. You guys can walk." It's
yeah.
just I can see it, but I can't drive there. What a
Yeah,
time.
yeah, it was there was lots of those funny stories for sure.
Man.
And particularly when we're trying to get from one stadium to the next, we're on quite tight deadlines again, because we would
Yes.
we would do 2 games a day sometimes, which was really special. Like, I never would dream, Luke, that I'd ever go to 2 World Cups in a day, and I did it
Mm.
about 9 days.
Yeah.
So for during the group stages. So there was these moments where you had to get to a bus at a certain time, and like one of the early games I was watching was going like at like 9 minutes about a time, and you start walking down the stairs, and then you're looking and you're like, blow the whistle, I've got to run to get my bus,
Yeah.
things like and then you get to the bus, and then you start typing away or doing your work as you commute to the next one, and just so you can make it. But you live in a dream, mate. Like, that's the
Yeah.
thing. Like, you live in a dream, right? It's such a blessing to be able
Mm.
to do that, and to go to spend that time there. And you try, and I certainly tried to take in every moment, every second. You're missing the family, and you're missing things back home, but you try and enjoy every moment of it, because it's a mental marathon, because you don't
Yes.
understand how are you going to retain the information. It's really difficult. And even now I look back, and I was able to go to 27 games in 21 days. But if you were to tell me right now, name every game and name every goal scorer and name every player, I would struggle, because
Mm.
I think the time away from it, that memory will return. But
Mm.
in the moment, as every athlete will tell you, you're just taking game by game by game, and you move into the
Mhm.
next game to give the best you can for that game, because you have to mentally put aside what you've seen to give for the best for that game. And you're subconsciously not trying to retain it too much, because you have to give the best for the next game.
Right.
So in a way, you're dismissing things more than you want to in your own mind. And if you're creating 3 weeks of unbelievable experiences traveling the world in different countries, they'll retain more, because you never want to dismiss them. But
Yes.
in a professional environment, you have to dismiss a couple of them, but to give your best for that next day.
Yeah. Yeah, totally fair. It makes perfect sense. But you're right. Yeah, what a dream. Well, and speaking of dreams, Christian, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, were you able to be personally present for Lionel Messi's World Cup debut in '06
That's
in
correct. Yes.
Germany? Yes.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I feel like no World Cup conversation, given the champions of our most recent World Cup, is complete without touching on that. I mean, soccer fans watched Messi not only lose the World Cup final in 2014, but also different Copa America finals and obviously experienced success in the summer of 2021 in the Copa America, and then obviously winning the World Cup in what was, I mean, I feel free to speak to this in a moment, but in my mind, a phenomenal World Cup final. But what have you seen in him as a player as you've watched him from his debut right through to his fifth and final World Cup, finally winning the tournament in his last game? What have you seen in him as a person in terms of his evolution as a leader, as a player? What do you think needed to change in him, or maybe change in the Argentinian squad in order to make it over that last hurdle and actually not just win in South America, but win at the World Cup?
Yeah, another great question. I think what's so special about team sports is that individuals are often almost glorified or fantasized by so many people, but in the end, it's the collective that wins, right? Like it's, I think particularly, and I'm a big sports fan, so I think from the North American, I've used this reference before, but I think from the North American point of view, a lot of North American sports are designated around the individual. So like baseball, the pitcher has so much power, right? If you don't have a good pitcher on the mound that day, you're not probably going to win the game, right? Yeah. In hockey, if you don't have a good goaltender, you're winning nothing, right? So there's your individual there, right? In football, you need a tremendous quarterback. You don't win Super Bowls unless you rarely win unless you have a great quarterback. Even in basketball, it's five. You'll know more about basketball than I'll ever know. But five players on a court, but you need to win an NBA championship, you need you need somebody who's a top 5 player in the league. When the Raptors had Kawhi Leonard, it changed them because he was an elite, great player. And so around collective sports, you still need individuals to shine. But I think in soccer, you will never going to carry a team to success unless the rest of them are on board. And that's what Argentina and Messi really struggled with. Prior to 2022, it was Messi's Argentina, and Messi was carrying them as far as he could go. And in the end, in the 2014 final against Germany, they lost that final because Gonzalo Higuain couldn't score when he had his chances in the final. Yeah. So it's proof that Messi needed somebody else to get them over the line. All the greats, as I've said in the past, everyone talks about Diego Maradona and Argentina in 1986. Maradona still needed Burruchaga to score the winning goal 5 minutes before the end to become a World Cup champion, right? And in the end, Messi still needed Emi Martinez to make one of the greatest saves in football history. He still needed that to win the World Cup, right? In the end, someone had to step up. And of course, Messi was the greatest player in the World Cup, and he carried them in parts. I was at the first game when they were shocked by Saudi Arabia. I was at the second game when they were so nervous that they were almost drowned in tension, that when he scored the goal against Mexico, there was an explosion, and no one did highs and lows better than Argentina. The real highs were the best. They were going to win the World Cup, and then the lows we're going to get knocked out in the group stage. This is a disaster. And so they had to ride that emotional wave and eventually find a point where they're confident enough to go out there and just work as a team and work as an 11. And so to answer your question, what I saw from Messi was more trust in his players, that they could help him get to those points. And yes, he would have the big moments and he would score the crucial penalties and he would score crucial goals. But during those times, he would trust them, and his body at 35 had to, that he couldn't do it all anymore. He couldn't do a Maradona versus England in 1986 and beat 10 men or 8 men on the word to score a goal. He had to trust more of those players, and Scaloni and his coaching staff had to build that structure around him to bring in another midfielder and to sometimes not play Di Maria or to make significant changes that thought, this is how we're going to get the best out of Messi, who became really a man of moments rather than a man of just the match all the time.
Yeah. So well said. So well said. And yes, what was your take, having seen many World Cup finals? What was your take on Qatar 2022's final?
Well, it's the greatest football game ever played, undoubtedly. And again, this is a God thing. I've been very blessed to see a lot of live sports and see a lot of things with my own eyes, either on television or a lot of times live, where I've seen a change in change in sport all around the world in the last 10 or 15 years, where I think these moments have taken some of these sports to another level that we never would have thought we'd see. You
Mm.
name the sport of your choice, you can come up with reference points over the last 10 or 15 years that a sport has got you out of your seat and you've gone, wow,
Yeah.
that happened.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is down to technology, athleticism of players, the creation now of we're making athletes better than they've ever been before.
Mm.
And so these supreme athletes, men and women, are taking sports to another level. And with it becomes these extreme moments.
Mm.
And I bring that up because we've seen it in the club game where we've had unbelievable finishes to the game. But I honestly, hand on heart, God as my witness, will tell you, I went to Qatar knowing that we were going to have that moment in Qatar. Not the way that it went, but I knew we were going to have a final. That international sport was going to have their moment. International football was going to have its moment that so many other sports had because it was time. And I never thought when I knew that was going to happen, and God is my witness, the truth, but I never would have imagined that even I could have scripted something like that, a storyline like that. It was so incredible that even now I'm having a hard time moving on from it. It's almost completed the sport, and I'm actually thankful that my job and my place in sport now is more at a grassroots level in the Canadian Premier League, where there's a real purpose to produce young Canadian players. Because if I was back to doing what I've been doing for the last 15 years, talking about high level Premier Leagues or high level international sport, I think there would be a gap, because the gap would be unfulfilled of what I've seen, because I've already seen the pinnacle. I've seen football completing itself. It's done. Nothing will ever be better. And I firmly think that in my lifetime, I don't think it can be any better than what we witnessed during those 120 minutes.
Well, it certainly was. You're right. The save by Emi Martinez with moments left, and then to go to penalty kicks, and not just the endurance, but the mental stamina players need, and the back and forth. It was glorious. We were super fortunate to take it in.
Yeah,
so.
Incredibly. I was emotional. It's just emotional to see it. And again, I felt Messi was going to win from the start. They were my pick all along, and that I don't say that because of I wanted to prove people that I was wrong. But what I meant by that was I was just so glad. I was happy that he won. I felt that he needed that moment. He deserved that moment, and it was emotional to see him lift it.
Well, about a month after the end of the World Cup, my wife and I were on a family trip in Costa Rica and stopped at a little roadside gelato store. And we're chatting with the lady serving the ice cream while obviously getting ice cream or gelato while we were there. And I said, so are you from Costa Rica? She said, no, I'm from Argentina. I said, you've had an amazing last few weeks, haven't you? She was like, we're still shaking. We're still shaking from Messi's World Cup. So you're right. Talk about, an incredible event.
Touches so many people's lives, I saw the scenes in Buenos Aires, and one of our players from the Canadian Premier League was there, and that's just the beauty of sport, right? Like it's just bringing people together. And I grew up as being a big Formula One fan. I'm not so much that fan now, but when it's shown in the Ayrton Senna documentary when he would win for Brazil, and how poverty stricken and how difficult that country was going through those moments when Senna won the world championship in 1991, and then Brazil won the World Cup in 1994, and how much it brought that country together. And none of us really know what other people are truly going through a lot of the time. And then for those moments to bring millions of people to the streets, no matter, whether their life is glorious or whether they're happy or their job or whether they're not, or whether they've got a job or where they live, and those moments they're just together and they're celebrating and they're hugging strangers, and they're celebrating this country that represents them. It's marvelous. It truly is marvelous. And it's a gift from God that we get those moments to celebrate.
Yeah, well said. Well, Kristian, we're getting towards the end of our time together, but as I was preparing for this, I was just appreciating the fact that you're right. You're usually in my seat and someone else is in yours. You're the one asking the questions and learning about their career, their experiences. And so I was interested to ask, what's one question you never get asked but I've always wanted someone to ask you about yourself, about your work, about your passion for what you do. And what would
Wow.
not only that question be, but how would you answer it?
Wow, you're good at this stuff, huh? That's a great question.
Kind of you. Thank you.
um, I think, and again, I love to turn these into conversations. So I'd love to know your thoughts on how I handle this too. No one really knows, and no one really ever asks me, how do I handle the blend of outpouring compliments and criticism? So
Mm,
what I mean by that is that, like, I'm placed in a position where for some reason people have a care of what I have to say about things. So I'm an analyst on soccer a lot of the times, and I'm placed in positions where sometimes, quite often, the show goes great and it's, everyone's talking about how wonderful things were. But then I'm also put in a position where I have to criticize,
mm,
and I have to be honest. And I find it hard.
mm,
I find it really hard because I don't want to come across as being somebody who knows it all. I do not know it all. I don't want to come across as somebody that enjoys being frustrated about a way a team's played or not delivering that they need to deliver.
mm,
But I also feel if I don't do any of that and I just stay on the other side, Luke, that it just becomes a little bit too formulaic and predictable. And I know when I watch people in other sports that I admire, I just want them to be authentic and
mm.
honest. And they're the best people that I can relate to. And I just hope people understand that I'm just trying to be me.
Right.
But it is hard, mate. Like when I'm
Mm,
told, when people come to me and they're saying that, this Canada team didn't play very well, tell me how you feel about it. And again, there's never a personal grudge against anybody. I'm just delivering what I feel like I need to say with my own eyes. But I
right.
think that's probably the hardest challenge, to be honest with you, mate, in terms of how I find that, the right words and the right tone to deliver that message.
Mm, yeah, totally fair. And being a lot of people are paying attention, you're right, to what you're doing and saying. And obviously, oftentimes there's heightened emotions around sports and people wanting to probably vociferously agree with you when they appreciate your assessment of something. And obviously, as you said, maybe on the flip side, be critical on that. But if anything, Kristian, you navigate that with a lot of class and a lot of poise. So I know I've seen that in you. So keep
Thank
doing
you.
what you're doing, man. Kristian, people listening in are going to want to say, we'd love to connect with Kristian. We'd love to learn more about his work with the Canadian Premier League. We'd love to engage with his online platform. So for people listening, where could they do that?
I'm on Instagram. My work Instagram is It's Kristian Jack. It's Kristian with a K, and on Twitter it's just Kristian Jack. So KRISTIAN JACK. That's my user handle on Twitter. And then I'm also, as you said earlier, really feeling the need to just continue to build the Canadian Premier League. It is a Canadian Premier League for Canadians. It is one that is obviously very new. We're just going into our 5th season. Many people in this country love the sport, and they love teams all around the world, and they're the teams that they watch on the weekend and they love, and they're connected with their families. And some people have found those teams within Canada now with Major League Soccer's teams in Vancouver and Montreal and Toronto, and get to watch those games. And what we want to do as a Canadian Premier League is bring those markets to you as well, and say that you can come and watch our games, and you can watch these young Canadians and produce players that can come through a pathway that can make it to the World Cup, like some have already done already. So canpl.ca is the website, and then you can just follow Canadian Premier League on all social platforms. We're really going towards TikTok a lot more, as well as Twitter and Instagram and YouTube. So we're trying to produce compelling content that Canadians can relate to and tell Canadian stories, and hopefully we can see a bunch of people that can come to Canadian Premier League games this year. We're in Vancouver now as a new market. We're already on Vancouver Island as well, in Victoria. We're in Calgary. We're in Winnipeg. We're out in Halifax, which is a fantastic market. They finally got their professional soccer team there. We're in the capital, where we had 15,000 people for our final in October with Atletico Ottawa. We're in the York region, and we're around Toronto, and we're in Hamilton, who's been our best team so far in 4 years. So the league is looking to grow, and I'm proud to be part of it. So anybody who wants to follow the Canadian Premier League, we'd like to thank you.
Excellent. Well, Kristian, I want to say for myself and our listeners, thank you for this time, for everything you shared, and for the great work you're doing, not just in sports broadcasting and journalism, but also with the CPL, and also as somebody who's walking with God in the midst of that and being a light for him. So thank you.
Thank you, Luke. You're a great mentor to me as well, and everything that you continue to do. And I love the show. And again, thanks for praying over me. And I felt compelled to share a few things with you that I hadn't shared with others. So hopefully it went across well. And again, I can't thank you enough for your time, and bless you and your family.
Oh, thank you, man. Very kind of you.